Osio, Deutschu. Dawado kun Khalid. Hello and how are you? This is Chief Eagle Spirit Dancing of the Cherokee Blackfoot Cultural Circle. I wanted to basically spark up a discussion on the myth of the Red Indian. Um, this is something that has basically, been a conflict within the very essence of my soul ever since I found out who I was. And when I say that, let me give you a brief description of my bio. I am Black and Native American Indian, born in Manhattan and raised in the northeast part of the Bronx. I for most of my adolescence, into my mid 20s, I did not know what my heritage, culture, historical background was, to say the least. Didn't even know who my biological parents were, any of my family. Thanks to the creator and the motivation, of course, on my part to you know be curious and want to find that part of my heritage. I basically began a search and found my family, and that search has not stopped. From 1992 to the present, 2011, I have been digging and you know finding information with regards to my own background, heritage, and it has been enlightening to say the least. um, uh, when finding that I am in fact indigenous, and of a mixed background, as most Indians are today, without a doubt. I said most. There are very few purebloods. There are, but I wanted to touch on that particular subject of purebloods in conjunction with the Red Indian myth, and I emphasize that word myth because what I've come across in my travels, particularly within the last, oh boy, I'd say 18 years now. Wow, I can't believe I found my family in 1992, and when I went to um, South Carolina and saw some of my family members on reservations, who pictures of families who had presented them to me to let me know this is part of your history. And um, coincidentally enough, or I say ironically enough, growing up in the Northeast Bronx, I had been mistaken as being Puerto Rican or Dominican or Arab for so many years, and it was frustrating. It was frustrating, to say the least. That it bothered me, not knowing, um, you know, what your identity was. It was stressful, and that, I guess, that was the motivating factor for me to find my family, and I was relentless in my pursuit. And I finally, came to fruition and found out who I am, and I'm proud of that lineage. I am Cherokee, or as the original interpretation is Chalagi, meaning the principal people. I am part Cherokee, Catawba, Watere, and uh, uh, I believe also part Muskogee or Seminole, if you will. I haven't proven that aspect of my heritage yet. It is just how should I say, a strong feeling of mine, with coupled with a vision that I had, of Osceola, that I am also part Seminole Indian. So, to not to keep the people, should I say, wondering what is it that I'm talking about with referring to the myth of the Red Indian. Upon my research and investigation, something that I like to do, uh, I have found that through a number of books that I've read, one, walking walking the red road, 365 days of walking the red road, and seeing a number of you know uh, illustrations, books, and some websites, and Red Indian and Proud, Red Pride, and I said, it's interesting. And then remembering some of the stereotypical images that I've seen in cartoons, particularly cartoons, um, that has shown our people as buffoons, in this bright reddish color. And some of us are not even in a red illustration. Now, I find that interesting because when they showed the cartoon movie Pocahontas, they showed her as a brown Indian, not red, brown. But of course, as the movie progressed, she started to get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. And I said to myself, where's the red? If she's supposed to be red, where is the red? Somebody please explain this to me, because I have not come across not one red Indian to date. And and it bothers me because I have before me evidence to say to the contrary of what has been um, uh, disseminated or taught. It kind of reminds me of the boarding schools. Not saying I've experienced that, because I haven't experienced a boarding school. I've gone through the public school system. I don't see much difference, because they haven't taught black people, or some poor whites, or some indigenous peoples that are in the black community. And there are a lot of us, trust me, I tell you, they're afraid to come out because of the stigma from white people and what they've done in this country, in terms of the projected image of Indians as being so light that some of them look so white that you can't even tell the difference, which still begs the question, where is the red Indian? So, on that note, I have to say that what it boils down to is deception. Um, that's the bottom line. It's been deception. In the order of the day, from the quotes from the boarding schools to save the man, you have to kill the Indian. Well, in order for them to project this image, um, in plain sight, they had to fool the masses of people into believing that we were red. Now, I remember going down to the Native American Indian Museum down in Bowling Green in Manhattan. uh, I remember for one particular Native American Indian brother who I represent, like brown skin Indian brother, like myself, and he was teaching in a particular area with regards to the culture, and I think it was the southeastern Indians in near Florida, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but we touched on the subject about the Red Indian issue, and he said there's no such thing as Red Indians, you know. And he said what happened was when the Mayflower or the Santa Maria and Nina, which they never made it to the mainland, when they were out in the Caribbean, interacting with the Taino Indians, the Arawaks and the Carib Indians that they came across. What happened was our people had engaged in uh, certain rituals when war, and when we were engaged either within a war ritual, whether it was uh, um, physical or a non-physical event with relationship to war, because we had mock wars, assimilation wars. We would wear red paint. And when the Europeans came upon us, they started saying, "Oh, these red people." But Christopher Columbus, now I have to touch on this also. Christopher Columbus said that he thought he was in India. Now, why would he make that assertion? Well, let's do a little research. Let's go back a little bit. If the people who are listening to this program are a little more learned and studied, they will understand that the Moors were in Spain from the 7th century on up to the 14th century, and that the Moors had traveled the world. Now, they might not have had cameras back in those days. All right, fine, right? But there were paintings. Art is something that is profoundly prolific and is not limited to just one geography. It is global. So Why did Christopher Columbus believe that he was in India? Because he saw the people who looked like paintings that they had in Spain, which they had received from paintings from the Moors who had traveled all over the planet. And when I say Moors, these were black people. They were black Muslims. You know, some people will argue that, but the proof is there. You just have to look for it. Their paintings look just like the indigenous peoples in the Caribbean and here in North America. Now, how ironic is that? So that's why he assumed, oh, I must be in India. Okay, fine. Is the word Indian, the term Indian, a negative word? No, I mean, for argument's sake, you can say what you want. I know for a fact that the Indian word itself is not a derogatory word. I embrace it. I have no problems with it. The problem is that they started to associate some of the ignorant of those who came, because clearly, as backward as Christopher Columbus was and as brutal and barbaric as he was somewhat educated, right? Okay, give him that. And not to mention that he had a Moor on board to help him navigate the seas. So it was his pirates, or should I say his crew members, that were on board that were beasts. I mean, literally pigs that he traveled with to the so-called New World. And when they came to our shores, they started to hurl slurs, and they started to treat our people in a beastly manner. We know the history of the cutting the infant or the child out of the womb of the indigenous woman, um, putting the Indian woman on what they call the four winds, attached each leg of the woman to, and they did it to the men as well and children, to horses, and have them go in separate directions, dismembering them, feeding them to the dogs, um, throwing them into the fires. All of these things were the Spanish did, the Spanish, the English, and so forth. The European countries that were involved in the slave trade. Oh, and another thing, not to digress too much, but the indigenous peoples were the first people enslaved in our own backyard. That was not successful because of the knowledge of living on your own land is much more harder to control someone in their own house, than if you go get someone from a farmland and bring them, and that makes it that much easier because there's nowhere for you to run. You don't know where to go or how to live off the land, and that will also correlate with another subject, the relationships between blacks and Indians in this country, which I will do another segment later on. I'm not going to get too much detail. But getting back to the red myth. So I hope that I have cleared a path of enlightenment for those who are less enlightened with regards to the red Indian. I consider myself to be a light brown Indian today. My father is black and Indian. He's mixed. His mother is Indian, and his father, my grandfather, is Indian, and my mother is Indian, and her father was Indian. So I am two halves that make one whole. For those who know fractions, be able to understand that. So again, breaking up the red Indian myth with raw facts. I'd like to just do a quick presentation. Just bear with me 1 second. You see some of these books here. Now, I don't know. Okay, Native American Indian portraits, right? You see that? I don't know about you, but that brother looks dark to me, right? Uh, just to name a few. Now, another thing they used to say, apart from that, was that the Indians didn't have any hair on their face. Okay, well, let's look here. Let's look here. Let's look here. Okay. Can we see that? Oh, look at that. Look at that. Look at that with the mustache. Looking like the Taj, or should I say, excuse me, the Maharaji from India. You see our clothes and how closely our clothes resemble some of the East Indians, especially here in the Eastern Woodland tribes, with regards to our regalia. That's how I know for a fact.